Rome. Today, it is a city of layered eternity, where ancient columns rise beside Baroque fountains, and the traffic roars past ruins that once commanded empires. In the 18th century, Rome was the undisputed cultural capital of Europe, a living museum of classical grandeur and Christian splendor, drawing the elite of the continent on the grand tour. But if you strip away the coaches, silence the bells, and peer beneath the neoclassical facades, you find a city still recovering from centuries of decline, a place of magnificent decay and quiet ambition. Before we step back into that world, tell me, where are you watching from today? Drop a comment with your city and country. It's incredible to see how far this passion for vanished history reaches. And if you love these journeys through time, hit subscribe for more. Now, let's travel back to the 1700s. The year is roughly 1750. Europe is in the Enlightenment era, but Rome remains under the rule of the popes. The heart of the Papal States, the city is no longer the million-strong metropolis of antiquity. Its population hovers around 140,000 to 150,000 souls, smaller than Naples or Paris, yet infinitely more revered. It is a city of pilgrims, priests, beggars, aristocrats, and increasingly, foreign visitors. A quarter of the inhabitants are clergy, or in religious orders. Another quarter lives in poverty, or on charity. The economy depends on pilgrimage, tourism, and the export of art, ancient marbles, modern paintings, and the aura of eternity itself. At the center stands St. Peter's Basilica, completed just over a century earlier, its dome dominating the skyline like a second sun. The Vatican, with its museums and libraries, guards treasures that no other place on earth can match. The Laocoon, the Apollo Belvedere, Raphael stands, but Rome's true magic lies in its contrasts. Walk from the opulent Piazza Navona, with Bernini's Fountain of the Four Rivers splashing dramatically, to the overgrown Roman Forum, where goats graze among fallen arches. The city is a palimpsest, layers of pagan empire, overlaid with Christian triumph, Renaissance revival, and Baroque exuberance. The streets are narrow, chaotic, and filthy by northern European standards. Sewage runs openly, in some quarters livestock wanders freely, yet the air hums with energy. Pilgrims flock for jubilees, and every year brings new waves of grand tourists, young British, French, German, and Scandinavian nobles completing their education. They arrive after crossing the Alps, often carried in sedan chairs over treacherous passes. Having studied manners in Paris, art in Florence, and pleasure in Venice, Rome is the culmination, the reason they endure months of hardship. Here, they hire cicerone, guides, to lead them through the ruins. They sketch the Colosseum at sunset, marvel at the Pantheon's perfect dome, still the largest unreinforced concrete vault in the world, and climb the Spanish Steps, newly built in the 1720s to link the church above with the bustling piazza below. Artists like Giovanni Paolo Panini paint Capricci, fantasy views cramming every famous room and statue into one canvas as souvenirs for homesick travelers. Pompeo Bertoni becomes the portraitist of choice, posing milords amid columns and urns, their silk coats gleaming against marble. Rome in the 18th century is the birthplace of modern archaeology and neoclassicism. Excavations at Herculaneum from 1738 and Pompeii 1748 reveal buried Roman life, fueling a craze for antiquity. Winkelmann, the German scholar living in Rome, publishes his groundbreaking History of the Art of Antiquity 1764, praising Greek purity over Roman excess and igniting the neoclassical movement that will reshape Europe. Yet beneath the grandeur lies tension. The Papal States are a theocracy in a secularizing age. Popes like Clement XII and Benedict XIV fund fountains, obelisks, and museums. But the city struggles economically. Cassini, Braschi, and Rezzonico palaces rise in Baroque splendor, their facades hiding debt. The church's power wanes as Enlightenment ideas spread. Voltaire mocks. Rousseau dreams of republics. Grand tourists, often Protestants, view Catholic Rome with fascination and suspicion. Or at the arts, unease at the incense and indulgences. Daily life pulses with ritual. Coffee houses buzz with gossip. The Corso fills full carnival, with masked revelers and horse races. Street vendors sell prints of Piranesi's dramatic etchings, dark visions of crumbling aqueducts and temples that romanticize decay. The Trevi Fountain, completed in 1762, becomes a new ritual. Toss a coin, promise return. Millions still do. Crime exists, but papal justice is swift. Public executions, galleys for thieves. The city polices itself through guilds, confraternities, and the watchful eye of the Holy Office. Yet violence is rare compared to other capitals. Rome's true danger is nostalgia. The weight of 2,000 years pressing on every stone. Food and drink tell their own story. Romans died on simple, hearty fare. Pasta al pomodoro, artichokes alla Judea from the Jewish ghetto, porchetta from the markets. Wine flows from the Castelli Romani hills, frascati and estate. Estate, served in Austria where cardinals rub shoulders with coachmen. The ghetto, confined since the 16th century, thrives as a vibrant enclave of Jewish life, producing skilled artisans, moneylenders, and the famous carsiofi alla Judea, deep-fried artichokes crisp as gold leaf. Music fills the churches and theatres. Corelli and Vivaldi echoes have faded, but Handel's Roman sojourns still resonate in oratorios performed at the Chiesa Nuova. Castrati voices soar in opera at the Teatro Argentina, enchanting audiences with unearthly purity. Women are barred from the stage, so these surgically altered singers command fortunes and adoration. Fashion reflects the divide. Aristocrats wear powdered wigs, silk breeches, and brocade coats. Pilgrims in rough war, clergy in black cassocks. Grand tourists adopt local flair. Tricorn hats, snuff boxes engraved with ruins, blending British restraint with Italian extravagance. Education happens informally. Noble sons study classics with Jesuit tutors, dissect antiquities, and debate philosophy in salons. Women of rank host conversazioni, where ideas flow as freely as wine, though formal power remains male. The city also hosted a thriving print and book trade. Printers near Piazza di Spagna churned out guidebooks, maps, and illustrated volumes of ancient inscriptions for eager tourists. Antiquarians and dealers sold genuine Roman coins, cameos, and fragments, sometimes restored or even faked, to collectors back home. This trade helped keep artisans employed and money circulating. Lighting after dark was sparse. Oil lamps flickered in doorways. Lanterns carried by link boys guided the wealthy home. Most streets fell into deep shadow, yet the moon over the Forum or the glow from open church doors created scenes of haunting beauty that Piranesi would later etch into legend. By the 1790s, the bubble begins to burst. French revolutionary armies approach. In 1798, a short-lived Roman Republic is proclaimed under French influence. Pope Pius VI is exiled to France. Dying in captivity, Napoleon will soon cart treasures to Paris, including the Laocoon and the Apollo. The Papal States fall. Rome is occupied. The Grand Tour, that golden age of aristocratic wanderlust, fades with the wars and the rise of mass travel. When the dust settles after 1815, Rome emerges transformed, no longer just a relic of popes and pilgrims, but the eternal city reborn in the 19th century as capital of a united Italy. Yet if you walk its streets today, listen closely. Beneath the scooters and selfie sticks, the ghosts of 18th century Rome linger. In the curve of a Bernini fountain, the shadow of a Piranesi ruin, the echo of a grand tourist song, the faint aroma of fried artichokes from a hidden trattoria, the distant chime of vespers. If you love this glimpse into the Rome of the Enlightenment, check out our reconstruction of Edo in 1650. You won't believe how a swamp became the world's largest city. Thanks for watching Vanished History.